Welcome to Empathy Stories, where every tale is a journey of transformation, resilience, and the profound connections that define us. Today's story is a powerful exploration of redemption, love, and the courage to embrace change. Sit back as we unveil the story of Michael and Lisa, a story that begins in conflict and blossoms into something truly extraordinary. Michael Reed, a man whose wealth was matched only by his sense of detachment, sat in his office overlooking the bustling streets of New York City. His desk, an immaculate expanse of polished mahogany, reflected the cold precision with which he conducted his life. He was a man who had risen to the top of his industry through sheer willpower and a belief that success required sacrifice, primarily of emotions, connections, and, as he often claimed, unnecessary distractions. Yet, this philosophy left him surrounded by an emptiness he refused to acknowledge. Lisa Bennett, Michael's housekeeper for the past 3 years, was quietly polishing the shelves in his office. She moved with an understated grace, her presence so unobtrusive that Michael often forgot she was there. Lisa was a sharp observer of people, her insight shaped by years of listening rather than speaking. She had an innate ability to read the unspoken words in a room, though she rarely shared her thoughts. In Michael's life, her role was clear: perform her duties with precision, avoid unnecessary interaction, and, above all, remain invisible. That morning, Michael had been pacing in his office, his thoughts consumed by a growing crisis at his company. Revenues were down, key investors were restless, and the weight of maintaining his carefully constructed empire pressed heavily on him. It was rare for Michael to feel anything other than control. But now, he found himself cornered. There was a business dinner scheduled for that evening, a pivotal opportunity to impress potential investors and buy himself time to stabilize the company. But Michael was single, recently divorced, and the idea of arriving alone, of showing even a hint of vulnerability, was unthinkable. His public image, meticulously curated, required the appearance of effortless power and success. A suitable companion for the evening, someone polished and discreet, would be necessary. He turned abruptly, his gaze landing on Lisa as she methodically wiped the surface of a glass trophy. For a moment, he hesitated, but his impatience got the better of him. "Lisa," he said, his tone curt and impersonal, "you'll accompany me to a business dinner tonight." Lisa paused mid-polish, her brow furrowing slightly. She turned to face him, her expression neutral despite the jarring nature of his request. "Me, sir?" she asked, her voice steady, though inwardly, she felt a surge of surprise. "Yes, you. I don't have time to find someone else," Michael replied, his words clipped. "You'll need to be discreet, quiet," and his gaze flicked dismissively over her plain attire. "Presentable," were something appropriate. Lisa's initial reaction was to decline. She knew this was not an invitation, but a directive. And yet, something inside her paused. Perhaps it was the rare chance to step outside the confines of her usual role, or the unspoken challenge in his voice. Whatever it was, she nodded. "As you wish, Mr. Reed," she said, returning to her work. The rest of the day passed in a blur. Lisa, whose wardrobe was modest and functional, borrowed a dress from her sister, a simple yet elegant navy gown that complemented her understated beauty. She styled her hair with care, her reflection in the mirror showing a version of herself she hadn't seen in years. When she arrived at the restaurant that evening, Michael was waiting by the entrance, dressed in a tailored suit. He exuded an air of authority that seemed to part the crowd as he moved. Yet, when his eyes landed on Lisa, there was a flicker of surprise, quickly masked by his usual indifference. "Let's go," he said tersely, leading her inside without so much as a greeting. The restaurant was a symphony of sophistication, soft lighting, polished silverware, and muted conversations blending with the faint strains of classical music. Michael's investors, a group of sharply dressed men and women, occupied a central table. As they approached, Lisa felt their eyes on her, their polite smiles thinly veiling the questions behind them. Michael introduced her briefly. "This is Lisa," She's with me tonight. There was no elaboration, no acknowledgement of her full name or role in his life. To the investors, she was an enigma, her presence out of place among their tailored suits and practiced airs. As the evening unfolded, Lisa remained quiet, observing the dynamics at the table. The conversation revolved around numbers and projections, the language of a world she had only glimpsed from afar. Michael spoke confidently, his tone calculated to convey competence. Though she noticed the slight tension in his jaw, a crack in his otherwise impenetrable facade. It was David Harrison, one of the more senior investors, who broke the unspoken barrier. Turning to Lisa, he offered a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "So, Lisa," he began, his tone a mixture of curiosity and condescension. "How do you find yourself at a dinner like this?" The question hung in the air, drawing the attention of everyone at the table. Michael stiffened, his eyes narrowing as he glanced at Lisa, a silent warning in his gaze. Lisa could have demurred, offering a polite and inconsequential answer. But something in David's tone, the quiet challenge it presented, spurred her to respond differently. "It's fascinating," she said, her voice steady but unassuming. "Hearing discussions about financial growth and projections is enlightening. But I've always believed that understanding the people behind the numbers is just as important as the numbers themselves. Without people, none of this would exist." Her words landed like a ripple breaking the surface of still water. The table fell silent, the investors exchanging looks of intrigue. David leaned back, his smile widening. "An interesting perspective," he said, clearly impressed. Michael, however, was anything but. His jaw tightened, his gaze hardening as he avoided looking at Lisa altogether. Throughout the dinner, Lisa's quiet confidence drew more attention. When the conversation turned to social responsibility, an area Michael had dismissed as a distraction, Lisa spoke again, offering thoughtful insights that resonated with the investors. Michael's discomfort was palpable. This was not the discreet, silent companion he had envisioned. Yet, for Lisa, this moment was not about defiance. It was about embracing a voice she had long kept hidden, a chance to prove, if only to herself, that she was capable of more. By the end of the evening, the investors left with renewed interest, not just in Michael's company, but in the woman who had quietly upended their expectations. Michael, on the other hand, walked ahead without a word, his frustration evident in the sharpness of his movements. Lisa lingered for a moment outside the restaurant, taking in the cool night air. She knew the night had changed something fundamental, though the full weight of that change was yet to unfold. Lisa returned to Michael's mansion that night, her thoughts a whirlwind of emotions. The evening had been a strange blend of triumph and unease. She had stood her ground, voiced her thoughts, and earned the respect of a room filled with powerful individuals. Yet, she couldn't shake the heavy gaze Michael had cast her way, a mix of frustration and disbelief that lingered even now. When she entered the house, the grand silence enveloped her like a heavy curtain. It was late, and the mansion's vast halls echoed faintly with her footsteps. She expected to retreat to her modest quarters and quietly prepare for the next day. But as she reached the bottom of the grand staircase, Michael's voice cut through the stillness. "Lisa," he called sharply from his office. "The door ayar." She hesitated for a moment, then stepped toward the room. His figure loomed behind the desk, his expression a storm of barely restrained irritation. He gestured for her to sit, though the gesture was more commanding than inviting. Lisa lowered herself into the chair, her back straight and her face composed. She refused to let his tension unsettle her. "What were you thinking tonight?" Michael began, his voice cold and clipped. "I asked you to accompany me, not to become the center of attention." Lisa's calm gaze met his stormy one. "I wasn't seeking attention, Mr. Reed. I was simply answering questions as honestly as I could." "Honestly," he snapped, his frustration boiling over. "You were supposed to be discreet. I didn't ask for your opinion or your analysis of the company." Lisa took a steadying breath, feeling the weight of his words, but refusing to crumble under them. "With respect, you brought me there without telling me what was expected. And when someone asked me a question, I answered it. I didn't think sharing my perspective would cause such an issue. Michael leaned back in his chair, running a hand through his perfectly styled hair. His anger, she realized, wasn't just about her speaking up. It was about what her words had revealed. The investors had been intrigued by her insights in a way they rarely were by his polished presentations. She had exposed a vulnerability in him, a crack in the armor he worked so hard to maintain. "You're a housekeeper, Lisa," he said finally, his voice lowering but no less cutting. "You're not paid to offer opinions at business dinners. Stay in your lane." Her breath hitched at the words, but she refused to let the sting show. Instead, she spoke with quiet strength. "If my presence was so inappropriate, why did you bring me? You didn't want me to have a voice. But you put me in a room where it was inevitable I'd be noticed. Was I just there to be a prop for the evening?" Michael's gaze hardened, his jaw clenching. He hadn't expected her to push back. "You were doing a job, Lisa, and getting paid for it. That's the beginning and end of it. Consider this your last day here. You're fired." The words hit like a hammer blow, but Lisa maintained her composure. She rose from the chair with deliberate grace, her chin held high. "If that's your decision, Mr. Reed, then so be it. But for what it's worth, tonight I discovered something I didn't know about myself. And no matter how much you try to dismiss me, I'm proud of that." She left his office without another word, walking away from the mansion that had been her world for 3 years. The night air was brisk as she stepped outside, but it felt freeing. The weight of her dismissal was heavy, but underneath it was a strange sense of liberation. Back in her small apartment, Lisa began to pack her few belongings. Her mind replayed the events of the night, but instead of focusing on Michael's harsh words, she thought of the investors, particularly David Harrison. His interest in her perspective had been genuine, and the respect she'd glimpsed in his eyes was something she'd rarely experienced in her life. For the first time in years, she felt seen as she folded the borrowed dress. Her phone buzzed. The unfamiliar number on the screen made her pause before answering. "Hello? Lisa Bennett?" The voice was warm, confident. "Yes, this is Lisa," she replied cautiously. "This is David Harrison. I hope I'm not calling too late." Her heart raced. "No, not at all. I wanted to say that your comments tonight left a strong impression on me," David said. "You have a perspective that's rare in our world, genuine and insightful. I believe it could be valuable in a professional setting. Are you open to exploring a new opportunity?" Lisa blinked in astonishment. Yes, I'd be very interested." "Excellent," David said. "I'll have my assistant send over the details. Let's schedule a meeting to discuss how we can work together." As the call ended, Lisa sat in stunned silence. The weight of her firing from Michael's household was still there, but now it was eclipsed by something far greater: opportunity. She smiled to herself, a spark of determination igniting in her chest. What had seemed like the end of a chapter was now clearly the beginning of something extraordinary. That night, Lisa fell asleep not as the housekeeper who had been dismissed, but as a woman stepping into a new world where her voice and her dreams had the chance to flourish. Lisa stepped into the office of Harrison Enterprises the following week, her heart thumping with a mix of nerves and excitement. The sleek glass walls, polished floors, and quiet hum of industrious activity contrasted sharply with the dim grandeur of Michael Reed's mansion. This was a world she had never imagined herself entering, not as a cleaner, but as a professional with a seat at the table. David Harrison greeted her warmly, his smile genuine as he motioned for her to sit. His demeanor put her at ease immediately. "Lisa," he began, his voice steady but kind, "your insights at the dinner last week were remarkable. You spoke with clarity and conviction, qualities this company could use." "Thank you," Lisa replied, her voice steady despite her inner anxiety. "I'm grateful for this opportunity." David leaned forward slightly, his tone turning serious. "I need someone who isn't afraid to tell the truth, even when it's inconvenient. We're at a turning point in this business, and I think you have the perspective we need to make the right decisions." Lisa nodded, absorbing his words. "I've never been in a position like this before, but I can promise you this. I'll approach it with honesty and hard work." David smiled again. That's all I ask. Let's get started. Lisa's first days were overwhelming but exhilarating. She shadowed David in meetings, took detailed notes, and immersed herself in learning the ins and outs of the business. The jargon was unfamiliar, the stakes higher than anything she'd encountered before, but she relished the challenge. Each evening, she stayed late, poring over documents and researching concepts she didn't understand, determined not to let her inexperience show. Her fresh perspective quickly made waves. In a brainstorming session with the leadership team, a heated debate broke out over how to allocate resources for a new initiative. As the executives clashed, Lisa hesitated, unsure if it was her place to speak. But David noticed her thoughtful expression and gestured for her to share her thoughts. "Lisa," he said, quieting the room, "you've been listening carefully. What's your take?" The attention of the room shifted to her, and for a moment, she felt the weight of 100 eyes. Taking a deep breath, she straightened her posture. "I think the key question here is impact," she said. "We're debating numbers, but we're not considering the people those numbers represent. If we want long-term success, we need to invest in initiatives that align with the values of our clients and employees." There was a brief silence, followed by murmurs of agreement. One of the senior executives nodded. "That's a solid point." David's expression was one of approval. "Exactly what I was hoping someone would say. Thank you, Lisa." After the meeting, several colleagues approached her with words of encouragement. Lisa's confidence grew, though she remained humble, fully aware that she had much to learn. The encouragement fueled her determination, and she worked even harder, balancing the delicate dance of speaking up when needed and listening when she wasn't sure. Meanwhile, Michael Reed's life was spiraling further into chaos. The crisis in his company deepened, his usual strategies proving ineffective. Investors were pulling out, contracts were being terminated, and his once imposing empire seemed to shrink by the day. The memory of Lisa's poised defiance at the dinner haunted him. He hadn't admitted it to anyone, not even himself, but her words had struck a nerve. She had exposed cracks in his leadership that he could no longer ignore. One morning, Michael sat at his office desk, staring at a grim financial report. The knock at his door startled him, and when he called for the visitor to enter, he was shocked to see David Harrison himself step inside. "David," Michael greeted, forcing a smile. "What brings you here?" David's expression was measured as he took a seat. "I'm here because Harrison Enterprises has just acquired a significant portion of your company's shares." Michael's forced smile faltered. "Acquired? What are you talking about?" "We've been observing your business for a while," David said calmly. "The decisions you've been making haven't inspired much confidence in your stakeholders. We saw an opportunity to step in, stabilize things, and ensure the company's survival." Michael clenched his jaw, feeling the sting of humiliation. "You're here to take over." "Not quite," David replied. "We're here to collaborate. And to make that happen, I've assigned someone to help oversee the transition." Before Michael could respond, the door opened again. When he turned to see who it was, his heart sank. Lisa walked in, her head held high, her expression calm but resolute. "Hello, Mr. Reed," she said evenly. Michael could only stare, his mind reeling. The housekeeper he had dismissed so coldly was now standing before him as a leader in the company that had seized control of his own. It was a moment that shook him to his core. "Lisa will be working closely with your team to develop a new strategy," David explained. "Her understanding of people and her ability to communicate effectively make her an asset in situations like this." Michael's lips tightened, his pride warring with the undeniable truth of his situation. He was no longer in control. And Lisa Bennett, the woman he had belittled and dismissed, was now his equal, if not his superior, in this new dynamic. After David left, Michael remained seated, his gaze fixed on Lisa. "I never thought I'd see you here," he said finally, his voice laced with bitterness. "Neither did I," Lisa replied calmly. "But life is a way of surprising us." Michael leaned back in his chair, studying her. "Do you enjoy this? The power, the chance to prove me wrong?" Lisa met his gaze steadily. "This isn't about proving you wrong, Mr. Reed. It's about doing what's right for the company, for the people who depend on it. If that happens to show you a better way, then so be it. Her words landed with an unexpected weight. And for the first time, Michael felt a flicker of doubt about his own approach to leadership. As Lisa left the room, he sat in silence, grappling with the realization that he might have far more to learn from her than he cared to admit. Lisa's role in the transition wasn't easy. Michael resisted her recommendations at every turn, his ego making him defensive and combative. Yet Lisa remained patient, determined not to let his attitude derail the work that needed to be done. She focused on building relationships with his team, earning their trust through transparency and collaboration. Over time, even Michael began to see the value in her approach. Her strategies weren't just about saving the company. They were about transforming its culture. The employees, once weary and demoralized, began to feel a renewed sense of purpose under Lisa's leadership. In moments of quiet reflection, Michael found himself replaying her words and actions in his mind. Her ability to remain composed under pressure, her focus on empathy and integrity, and her refusal to compromise her principles stood in stark contrast to his own methods. Slowly, grudgingly, he began to acknowledge the wisdom in her approach. For Lisa, the journey was as much about personal growth as professional success. Each day, she discovered new strengths within herself and found fulfillment in knowing she was making a tangible difference. She didn't dwell on the past or seek revenge against Michael. She simply focused on moving forward, driven by the belief that leadership was about service, not control. And so, as the weeks passed, a quiet transformation began to take shape, not just in the company, but in the lives of those at its helm. As the weeks unfolded, the tension between Lisa and Michael reached a simmering equilibrium. He had begrudgingly accepted her role, but remained defensive, masking his discomfort with curt remarks and veiled jabs during meetings. Lisa, however, refused to be drawn into his battles. Her focus remained on the work, the people, and the changes the company so desperately needed. One afternoon, Lisa walked into a meeting with Michael and several department heads. A discussion on restructuring was already underway, and the room buzzed with divided opinions. Michael leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, his skepticism evident as Lisa took her seat. "Our resources are spread too thin," Lisa began, addressing the group. "We need to prioritize projects that align with long-term goals rather than chasing short-term gains. That means cutting some initiatives that, while profitable now, won't sustain the company's future." Michael snorted softly. "Easy for you to say. Lisa, cutting projects means cutting people. Do you know what that kind of decision feels like?" Lisa met his gaze calmly. "It feels like responsibility, Mr. Reed. And leadership means taking responsibility for decisions that are difficult but necessary." The room fell silent. Michael's jaw tightened, but he didn't respond. Instead, one of the department heads, a seasoned man named Evelyn, spoke up. "She's right. We've been reactive for too long. It's time for a more strategic approach." Lisa continued, her tone unwavering but empathetic. "If we invest in people and build a foundation of trust, we won't have to make these kinds of cuts in the future. It's not just about saving money. It's about creating a culture that thrives." By the end of the meeting, the tide had shifted. Even Michael's staunchest allies were beginning to see the value in Lisa's vision. As the team dispersed, Michael lingered, watching Lisa gather her notes. "You don't give up, do you?" he said, his voice quieter than usual. Lisa looked up, surprised by the absence of hostility in his tone. "No, I don't," she replied simply. Michael hesitated, as if weighing his next words. "I used to think persistence was a weakness, something people clung to when they didn't know how to adapt. But maybe I've been wrong." Lisa tilted her head, her expression softening. "Persistence is only a weakness if it's rooted in ego. But when it's driven by purpose, it's one of the strongest things we have." For a moment, Michael seemed to consider her words. Then, with a small nod, he left the room. It was a brief exchange, but it marked a subtle shift in their dynamic, a crack in the wall he had built around himself. Michael's moments of self-reflection became more frequent. Late one evening, he sat alone in his office, the dim light casting shadows across the room, staring at the framed photos on his desk, images of past triumphs, awards, and a younger, prouder version of himself. He felt a pang of nostalgia. But that nostalgia was tinged with regret. He had built an empire, but in doing so, he had alienated the very people who had helped him build it. Lisa's words replayed in his mind. Leadership means taking responsibility. He had always equated leadership with control, power, and results. But now he wondered if he had misunderstood it entirely. The next day, Michael surprised the office by calling an all-hands meeting. Employees filed into the main conference room, whispering among themselves. Lisa stood at the back, curious but wary. She hadn't been informed of the meeting's purpose and suspected Michael was preparing another one of his grand speeches. When Michael entered, the room fell silent. He approached the podium, gripping its edges as if steadying himself. For a moment, he scanned the faces before him, his expression uncharacteristically vulnerable. "I've made mistakes," he began, his voice steady but subdued. "I've let my pride and my drive for success blind me to what truly matters. This company wasn't built by one person. It was built by all of you. And for too long, I've failed to acknowledge that." The room was utterly still. Even Lisa, who had grown accustomed to his defensive posturing, was caught off guard by his tone. "I want to change," Michael continued, "but I can't do it alone. I need your help, your ideas, your honesty, and your trust. Together, I believe we can rebuild this company into something stronger, something better." The silence was broken by a smattering of applause, which quickly grew into a full ovation. Michael looked out at the crowd, his face a mixture of relief and determination. When his eyes met Lisa's, she nodded subtly, a silent acknowledgement of the effort it had taken for him to stand there. In the weeks that followed, Michael made good on his promise. He began attending project meetings, not as an overseer, but as a participant. He listened more than he spoke, took notes, and asked questions. His humility, though hesitant at first, gradually became genuine. Lisa continued to lead with her characteristic blend of firmness and compassion. She and Michael worked closely, often clashing but always finding common ground. Their interactions were no longer charged with resentment. Instead, they carried a sense of mutual respect. One afternoon, during a visit to a community outreach program funded by the company, Lisa and Michael found themselves sitting side by side, watching a group of young people present their ideas for a local initiative. The enthusiasm in the room was palpable, and for the first time in years, Michael felt inspired by something other than profits. As the presentations wrapped up, one of the young participants approached them. "Thank you for supporting this program," she said, looking at both Lisa and Michael. "It's made such a difference in our lives." Michael glanced at Lisa, who smiled warmly at the girl. "We're proud to be part of it," Lisa said, "and it's people like you who make it all worthwhile." As they walked back to the car, Michael broke the silence. "You were right," he said, his voice quiet but firm. "About everything. I've been so focused on success that I forgot why I started this in the first place." Lisa stopped, turning to face him. "It's never too late to remember," she said gently. Michael looked at her, a flicker of something deeper passing between them. "Thank you, Lisa, for not giving up on me." Lisa's smile widened. "I didn't do it for you, Michael. I did it for the people who believe in this company, and for what it can become." As they resumed their walk, a sense of calm settled between them. The journey was far from over, but for the first time, they were on the same path, united by a shared vision and a growing sense of trust. The transformation within the company was palpable. Employees walked the halls with renewed energy. Projects were gaining traction, and the culture was shifting from one of fear and control to one of collaboration and trust. Yet, while the external progress was celebrated, the deeper evolution within Michael and Lisa continued to unfold in quiet, meaningful ways. Michael spent more time immersed in the company's community initiatives, visiting projects and speaking directly with those impacted. His conversations weren't just polite formalities. He was genuinely listening, asking questions, and, for the first time in years, allowing himself to feel the weight of their stories. It was humbling, and it grounded him in a way he hadn't experienced before. Lisa noticed these changes in him, but remained cautious. She had seen glimpses of sincerity from Michael in the past, only for his old habits to resurface. This time, though, it felt different. His actions were consistent, and his decisions were beginning to reflect a true commitment to the values she had been championing. Still, she kept her focus on the work, ensuring that progress continued regardless of Michael's personal growth. One evening, after a particularly successful presentation to the board, Michael and Lisa lingered in the conference room. The other executives had left, leaving the two of them alone in the quiet space. Michael leaned back in his chair, a thoughtful expression on his face. "We did it," he said finally, breaking the silence. "The board is fully behind the new initiatives. They believe in the direction we're taking." Lisa nodded, a faint smile on her lips. "It's not just us, Michael. It's the team. They've put everything into making this work." Michael looked at her, his gaze lingering. "But it wouldn't have happened without you. You saw what this company could be when I couldn't. You fought for it, even when I made it impossible." Lisa met his eyes, her expression softening. "You're giving me too much credit. This was a collective effort. And besides, you're the one who chose to change." Michael shook his head, his voice quiet but firm. "I wouldn't have changed if you hadn't challenged me. You've been the mirror I needed, even when I didn't want to see my reflection." The room fell silent again. But this time, the pause was filled with unspoken emotions. Lisa broke the moment by gathering her papers, her movements deliberate. "We both learn a lot, Michael, but there's still a long way to go." As the weeks turned into months, the partnership between Lisa and Michael deepened. Their professional synergy was undeniable, but something more was beginning to take root. They found themselves sharing moments outside of work, discussing books, debating philosophies, and even laughing over shared memories from their respective journeys. One evening, after a long day, Michael invited Lisa to dinner. She hesitated at first, wary of blurring the lines between their professional and personal lives. But something in his invitation felt sincere, and she agreed. They chose a quiet restaurant, far removed from the corporate world they inhabited. The ambience was warm and intimate, with soft lighting and the faint hum of jazz in the background. As they sat across from each other, the conversation flowed effortlessly, shifting from work to life and back again. Michael shared stories from his childhood, his humble beginnings, his drive to succeed, and the sacrifices he had made along the way. Lisa listened intently, seeing a side of him she hadn't known before. In turn, she opened up about her own journey, the challenges she faced growing up, and the dreams that had brought her to where she was. "I always believed that success was about proving something," Michael admitted, his voice tinged with regret. "To myself, to the world. But now I see it's about so much more than that. It's about the lives you touch, the legacy you leave behind." Lisa smiled, her gaze steady. "That's a lesson not everyone learns, Michael, and the fact that you're learning it now says a lot." As the evening wore on, the connection between them grew undeniable. When they left the restaurant, walking together under the streetlights, Michael hesitated. "Lisa," he began, his voice unsure but sincere. "I don't know what this is between us, but I know it's more than just work." Lisa stopped, turning to face him. Her expression was a mix of surprise and understanding. "I've felt it too," she admitted quietly. "But this is complicated. Michael, we're building something important, and I don't want to risk it." Michael nodded, his expression thoughtful. "Nerdoi, but I also don't want to ignore what's here." Lisa looked at him for a long moment before speaking. "Let's take it one step at a time. The work comes first, but maybe we can figure this out too." Michael smiled, relief and hope evident in his face. "I can live with that." Their relationship, while still undefined, brought a new depth to their partnership. They continued to lead the company together, their shared vision guiding every decision. The board, once skeptical of their dynamic, now fully supported the direction they were taking. Under their leadership, the company expanded its community programs, introduced sustainable practices, and became a model for ethical business. But the true measure of their success lay in the people they impacted. Families were thriving, communities were rebuilding, and employees felt valued and inspired. Lisa and Michael had created something far greater than a profitable company. They had built a legacy. One sunny afternoon, as they visited a community center supported by the company, Michael watched Lisa interact with the children there. She knelt to their level, her smile radiant as she listened to their stories and dreams. In that moment, Michael felt a wave of admiration and something deeper, love. Later, as they walked through the center's garden, Michael stopped her. "Lisa, I need to tell you something." She turned to him, her expression curious. "What is it?" Michael hesitated, then took a deep breath. "I never imagined I'd find someone like you. You've changed my life in ways I didn't think were possible, and I don't want to go another day without telling you how I feel." Lisa's eyes softened, her emotions clear in her gaze. "Michael, she paused, her voice steady. "I feel the same way, but this is big, and we need to be sure." Michael nodded, a smile breaking across his face. "I am sure, but we'll take it at your pace." In that moment, surrounded by the garden's quiet beauty, their partnership transformed into something greater, a bond built on respect, trust, and a shared dream for a better future. Together, they knew they could face whatever challenges lay ahead, not just as colleagues or partners, but as equals walking the same path. Thank you for joining us on Empathy Stories. We hope Michael and Lisa's journey inspired you to believe in the power of change, love, and human connection. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more heartwarming tales that remind us of our shared humanity. See you in the next story.